Previously on Practical Research 1. Looking back, we were able to identify the different research approaches as well as the different characteristics of both quantitative and qualitative research. We also talked about the ethical research standards that must be observed, both for quantitative and qualitative research, as well as the sanctions that are imposed when violations against these ethical standards are committed. Furthermore, we also discussed the different types of qualitative research approaches and dug into the characteristics of each type of approach. And with that, good day, students. Welcome to Practical Research 1, lesson number 4. And for this lesson, we aim to achieve the following objectives. First is to identify the preliminary parts of the research introduction. Second is to break down the parts into their components. And finally, to construct an outline for the preliminary parts of the research introduction. So what are we going to talk about today? Today we're going to talk about Chapter 1. And this is the first part of your qualitative research. And in this preliminary lesson, we will focus on the first 4 parts of Chapter 1, which are the background of the study, the purpose of the study, the research questions, and the theoretical framework. Now, I have also incorporated some samples taken from previous researches, which will serve as our guide in helping you get an idea as to how these components are constructed. So without much ado, let's begin with the lesson. So to give you an overview, Chapter 1, or the introduction, is the beginning of all academic papers. And like all academic texts, we all start with the introduction. So this part will serve as the overview of the research problem. It's going to serve as the warm-up. Okay? It gives your readers an idea as to where you're coming from, what the research problem is, and what the common understanding about the research problem is at the moment. So this will also include the current body of knowledge dedicated to that research topic. So what is understood and what is known about the research problem will also be found in your introduction. And apart from that, we also mention the significance of this research, why it is being conducted, and the prelude to the direction that the research wishes to take via the research questions. So basically, we're building the foundations of your qualitative research, starting with chapter number 1. So to give you a keyword, basically, chapter 1 is an overview, a warm-up to your actual paper. Now, let's break down the components. Okay, let's go to objective number 2. So to break down the components of chapter number 1, it is usually composed of 8 parts. The first 4 parts we will be discussing in this lesson, starting with the background of the study. Now, in the background of the study, this is where you are going to express what is known about the research problem. You're going to explain the research problem, and you're going to do that by first giving the description or the definition of that problem. Okay, what do you understand about the problem, and how is it defined in the current setup? So that's the description. The second one is you're also going to look at the urgency of the research problem. You're going to establish that urgency. Why is it important for us to look into that research problem? Or why is the research problem a big deal? Now, after you've done so, you also have the global, national, and local scope of the research problem. This is where you situate your research problem in a foreign country, in our country, and most specifically in our local environment, probably the city or your direct environment where the participants are also located. Now, as you can see, I mentioned there that there are citations needed because this is the part of the research where you are going to begin citing your sources. And last but not the least, you also have your research gap. Okay, so I will explain to you what the research gap is in the succeeding slides. The second part of chapter 1 is the purpose of the study, and for this part, we are going to use the format given by John Creswell. The third part is the research questions, where you are going to place about 2 or 3 research questions, which will serve as the direction of your data collection procedure and the research instrument that you will be using for data collection. Then last but not the least, you have your theoretical framework, where it is composed of the theory that you're going to use, the nature of the theory that you are using, as well as the relevance of the theory to your intended study. So let's try and specify. Let's zoom in on these parts and let's determine how they are constructed in real time. So the background of the study. This is the first component of the research introduction, and in this component, you as the researcher or the researchers will discuss the overview of the research problem, and you are going to establish the urgency of the research problem as well. Now, after that has been achieved, after you've done so, you will move on to situate the research problem as it is observed from a global, national, and local scope or point of view. This means that you are going to try and identify whether the same problem is also occurring in other countries, in other places in the Philippines, and whether it is also observed by other people in the same community where you are located. So this is significant. Okay, why is this important? Because this gives a sense of universality in terms of the research problem. That this is no longer an isolated case. That other people have also gone through the same problem, and this is precisely the reason why I want to conduct a study regarding this research problem. Okay, so finally, once you have established the definition or the understanding, the urgency, and you have identified that it does happen in other places as well, this time you are going to identify the research gap, where you will be discussing the discrepancy between the urgency of the problem. Okay, you're going to state that yes, this research is very important. We need to know the answer to this problem. But there is very little material available in status quo or in the present to answer or resolve that problem. So that is the research gap. The discrepancy between the urgency of solving the problem and the availability of the materials that can be used to resolve said problem. Okay, so let's go to defining the research problem. Okay, so how do we define the research problem? How do we give an understanding or the concept? When defining your research problem, a researcher or the researcher, you in this case, will not just merely take the dictionary meaning of the word. No, you don't go to the dictionary and just take out whatever synonym is found there. Instead, your duty as a researcher is to paint a picture of the current understanding of the concept. Okay, again, not the dictionary meaning, but how it is understood and perceived in the current setup, in the current time. So here, the researcher begins to tell a story by illustrating what is already happening, the research problem, and the extent to which the research problem is observed, or the urgency. So you're going to identify a problem, and then you're going to tell me why it is a big deal. So from this part, your readers will now be able to identify a starting point for your research. In a way, you're telling them this is where I would like to focus on in terms of this research paper. So how do we relate that to academic texts, since researches are examples of academic texts? Think of your first paragraph, or think of the research problem as your thesis statement. That you're going to tell your readers, this is going to be the focal point of my essay, okay, the thesis statement. But in this case, since you are writing a research paper, the research problem is now going to be your thesis statement. My research will be all about this research problem and nothing more. So it helps you to focus the attention of your readers on the problem that you have identified. So ideally, this part of the background of the study will take up the first paragraph of your research. So that paragraph is going to be the research problem, the definition of the problem, and the urgency. So let's take a look at a sample, okay? We're talking theoretical. If I'm simply going to tell you what it should contain, it's purely theoretical. Let's look at an actual application of this format or these components. All right, the sample. Okay, so as you can see, the understanding of the research concept, what is understood about the research problem, is the one in red. And the researchers actually proceeded to the definition of the research problem. They defined the problem. Okay, so they did not go to the dictionary. Instead, they looked for another research which talked about the same problem. So in this case, it's Compa. They cited the work of Compa in 2014. Now, finally, the researchers also gave the urgency. Why is it important? Why should we conduct a research regarding this problem? And that is the one, that is the one in yellow. Okay, so you have the one in red, the one in blue, and the one in yellow. The one in red is the understanding of the problem. The one in blue is the understanding about, or the definition of the problem. And the one in yellow is the understanding about the urgency, okay, why it is such a big deal. So let's go to the second paragraph of your background of the study, which is the global setting. So the global setting, this is where you narrate how the same research problem, the one you identified in the first paragraph, is viewed and observed in other countries. Now you try to identify whether the same thing is happening in, say, another country in Europe or another country in Asia. And you're going to identify how it is perceived, how it is understood in their context. So ideally, when writing the global setting, it helps to look at two different countries. This one is just a personal suggestion. It would be good to look at two different countries, one from the West and one from Southeast Asia, maybe a neighbor, or maybe one from Asia. Okay, that way we can establish that this is not something that only one hemisphere of the world experiences. This is not isolated to the Eastern countries or the Western countries. Let's try and establish the universality of a problem by citing two countries, one from the West, one from the East. So in this paragraph, you must research about whether your identified research problem is also observed in those countries. And you must cite those sources properly. Again, for the sake of this study, we are going to use the 7th edition of the APA format. So let's try to look at the sample once more. Okay? A sample global setting. In this particular context, they looked at the challenges, okay, of personalized learning for students who are located in New York City. So again, this one is the West. Did they use an Eastern country? Unfortunately, no. But they did use one from the Western Hemisphere, okay, the one from the USA. So as you can see, this one tells you of a story or a narration of the plight of the students coming from New York City, okay, from another country. It's the same problem. By the way, the problem in this sample research is self-paced learning. Okay, so individual learning, self-paced. So they situated the same problem in New York City. So let's go to the national setting. Okay, so from a macro sense, a very big world out there, we try and narrow it down. So we narrow it down to the scope of the national level. Okay, so just the Philippines. We're not going to go outside the Philippines anymore. We are now going to specify further and proceed to the discussion of the Philippine context. So in this case, we are going to look at the problem from the point of view of the Philippines. Same problem, but more specialized context. So in this case, since the problem was about online learning or individual learning, self-paced learning, then we are going to situate self-paced learning and individual learning in the lens of the Philippine education system. So how did the researchers do that? So as you can see, the one in red, okay, so the one in red is the discussion of the context of individualized learning in the Philippines. But they also gave a primer. Okay, the ones in black, they're the primer. So the study entitled Design and Use of Instructional Materials for Student-Centered Learning. So this is more like a prelude to the discussion of, or to the mentioning of the plight of the Philippines in terms of individual learning or student-centered learning. And that is the one in red. So these studies, these statements were taken from researches conducted in the Philippines. Okay, so let's go to the local setting. So for the local setting, this is where you narrow down even further. From the very macro sense of the whole world to the Philippines, we are now going to specify further and focus on Davao City. Or even further, you could go to your direct community or your school for that matter. So to narrow down the context of the research even more, the local setting is now discussed. This is the fourth paragraph in your background of the study. So in this paragraph, you must talk about the presence of the research problem in your direct environment. So if you are a student of a particular school, then your direct environment is that school. Now, usually this is also the source of the inspiration behind the proposed topic because you're not going to observe the problem as it happens in New York City because you're not there. Most likely, the inspiration behind the research problem would be your direct environment. So if you're going to identify a research problem, most probably it is something that you have observed in the area where you are located. So what was the local setting of our sample research? The local setting was identified as a study conducted by Miss Biongan, okay, who went to the University of Mindanao, which is found here in Davao City. And she conducted a research entitled Reflective Thinking Skills of Teachers and Students' Motivational Preferences, the Mediating Role of Teachers' Creativity on Their Relationship. This has something to do with the creativity of the materials produced by teachers and the amount of motivation that it has on the students to continue learning on their own. So in this study, it was revealed that the level of creativity that the teachers possess was very high and that they provide the learners the activities that they will have to do on their own. So the more crafty the teacher was in designing activities that students can learn on their own, the more that the students were able to find ideas and share these ideas with other people. So it's more of collaborative learning and self-paced learning. So not only did the students acquire information on their own, they were now more able to share these ideas with other students. So as you can see, there is now the transformation. Okay, there is now the zooming in of information, one from a very macro sense, which was New York City, down to the Philippines and down to the local setting. So how do we end the background of the study? Well, the last paragraph is the research gap. And the research gap is simply the aspect of your research that lacks resolution because of insufficient knowledge about that area. So you will discuss what is not known about your research problem. Again, I was mentioning discrepancy a while ago. So you have to know that you have to tell them, or you have to write in the research gap, that this is what is known about the problem. Okay, this is everything we understand about it. These are the things that we want to know, but there are no materials available. So if you put these two together, you can now identify the missing parts. And that missing part, that discrepancy, is the research gap. What do we not know about the research problem? So in your case, once you identify a research problem, say, let's use the sample here, online self-paced learning or student-centered learning. If we are going to look at what is known about student-centered learning, we only understand that, okay, in student-centered learning, students are given the opportunity to learn at their own pace. That's pretty much self-explanatory. But the researchers made it clear that there's something that we do not know yet about student-centered learning. And what was the discrepancy that they identified? From here, you can say that the researchers began with the discussion of the aspect that lacked information. Okay, so what is missing? What do we want to know? It is clear in the sample, okay, quoting the sample, it is clear that the primary focus is only around the benefits of a student-centered pedagogy or teaching on the academic development of a child. On the basis thereof, there is a discernible concern encompassing the phenomena. And what is this concern? That is the matter of uncertainty lying within the relationship of the student-centered teaching approach and its usefulness in developing students into competent economic assets of the future global community. This gap remains problematic because the education system must be designed to institute well in an era where standardization, efficiency, and good quality of work are all sought after. So what was the discrepancy? They said that, yes, we know that student-centered learning has all these benefits, that it allows for academic development. But what we don't know is whether student-centered learning helps in developing skills that the learners or the students will be able to use once they are now in the workforce, once they become employees, or once they become or once they graduate from college. They want to know whether student-centered learning will or is instrumental in developing these skills. But since there is no available research yet, that is the gap. Okay, so that is the gap that they want to fill. So what is the one in blue? This is now the discussion of the benefits posed by their research. Because the gap exists, then our research will be able to do this. There is a need to conduct a study on the effect of having a student-centered environment on developing skilled and globally competent students. So because we don't know yet whether it can develop skills in the students, that is precisely what our research is going to do. We are going to fill that gap, and we are going to answer that question. Can student-centered learning develop skills which students like you can use in the future? So there, they started with a problem the identification of a problem, that yes, the term student-centered learning is already prevalent. It's widely used among many institutions. And in fact, in New York, this is already happening. In the Philippines, you can also see this phenomenon happening. In Davao City, this is also happening. But once we take out a microscope and we look even deeper, there's something that we missed. Okay, we have all these information, but there's something that we missed. And this is the research gap. What we don't know yet is whether this approach can develop skills in the students. So there is now a very coherent transition of terms from the first paragraph down to the fifth paragraph. You're now able to properly transition and tell a story. Okay, so this one is the end of the background of the study. Deep breaths first. Okay, so what's next? Okay, what follows after the background of the study? Now, once we establish what is known about our research problem and what is not known about the research problem, it is now time to look for the purpose. Why are we conducting this research? Okay, that's what we need to answer. You're not going to write a purpose or the purpose of the study from scratch. Instead, we are going to follow the format of Creswell. Okay, this one I believe is pretty much direct to the point, and that is why I like it. It's short, but it's very, it's packed with information. So, in a nutshell, the purpose of the study's format, according to Creswell, is provided here. So, all you need to do is fill in the blank. So, the purpose of this blank study, is it a narrative? Is it an ethnographic study? A grounded theory study? Is it a case study? Etc., etc. So the purpose of this blank, fill in the blank, is to, and then you're going to place the objective of your study or what you want to accomplish. In this case, I will be giving you the sample after this slide. Okay, so blank, the objective, period. At this stage in the research, comma, the research problem, okay, fill in the research problem, will be generally defined as, and then the operational definition of the research problem, how it is understood or how it is being defined. Not from the dictionary, but your understanding of the term. So to give you a sample, same research problem, okay, they defined or they gave the purpose of the study as such. So in here, the details have already been filled. The ones in black are the generic statements, but the blanks are the ones in color. So the purpose of this, and they use the phenomenological study. So the purpose of this phenomenological study is to blank, what was the objective of the research? To understand and develop ideas about the effectiveness of student-centered approach in teaching the students skill development. Period. Okay, so at this stage in the research, blank the research problem. So at this stage in the research, the student-centered pedagogy for student skill development, that was the research problem, will be generally defined as what is now the operational definition or their understanding of the research problem. It is a set of activities that are outcomes-based, interdisciplinary in nature, and involves experience-based and hands-on learning that educators employ to combine the concept of 21st century skills such as critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication into the academic or into the students' academic activities and learning strategies. So as you can see, they did not define student-centered pedagogy according to its dictionary meaning. Instead, they took the operational definition, how they are going to use it in terms or in the context of their study. So this is the sample. So what's next? After you have fulfilled the purpose of the study, now it is time to establish the direction of your research by way of the research questions. Now, the research questions are here to help you acquire the data that you're going to need in your study. because this is going to be the basis for your research instrument and probably your data collection procedure as well. So in qualitative research, research questions usually target experiences, stories, perceptions, opinions, and other subjective forms of data. We are not going to place a hypothesis. We are not going to measure the socio-demographic profile of your participants. We are not looking for ratings. We are not looking for scores. We are looking for experiences, stories, narrations, perceptions. And all of these are subjective forms of data. These are non-numeric at all. So therefore, we avoid the terms like socio-demographic profile, the level of, or the average of, the significant difference between this, and other terms pertaining to data which are quantitative in nature. Again, in qualitative research, usually there is no hypothesis because we cannot assume the outcome because the outcomes are very varied and volatile. So, it begins with the mention of the research objective. Okay, we're just going to reiterate the objective of the research and then followed by the actual research questions. So, to exemplify, to give you a sample, there will be one, okay, after this slide. So, it is important to know that research questions are crucial because these questions will now serve as the basis for the construction of your research instruments, especially if you're going to use an interview guide or an FGD guide. So research questions must be clear and must be open-ended questions. These must not be questions answerable by yes or no. Okay, again, the research questions should not be answered by yes or no. So again, to give you an example. Okay, so same research. The objective, they began with the objective. The study will be conducted in order to understand the underlying aspects that link the implementation of a student-centered approach with the student skill development. That's the objective. Followed by the actual research questions. Again, these are open-ended questions, not answerable by yes or no. Question number 1, what are the lived experiences of the students under the student-centered approach? Again, you're looking for narrations and experiences. And number 2, what are the challenges experienced by the students while under the implementation of the student-centered approach? So as you can see, these are questions which are open-ended. Okay? You cannot answer these by yes and no. Okay. What are your experiences? Yes. Okay. That's not possible. You're supposed to give a lengthy response to these questions. Are these the questions that you're going to ask your participants? No. These are the foundations of the questions that you are going to ask your participants. These are where your research question, your research instrument questions, your interview questions will be based on or anchored on. Okay, so the last preliminary part, okay, the last of the 4 parts, or the first 4 parts of the research introduction is the theoretical framework. The theoretical framework introduces and explains the theoretical foundations of your study. So in a way, you're going to explain and identify certain theories that will help you establish the origins of your study by creating a connection between theoretical propositions and your research. So you're going to look at theories which may help you explain the research problem. These theories may be used in order to explain the current setting also, or why the behavior, the perceptions, or experiences of the participants are as such. So you're going to try and foresee what kinds of responses you might get from your participants and look for theories that might help you explain those responses. So ideally, about 2 or 3 theories are used under the theoretical framework, and it's very important that you maintain it to 2 or 3. Too many and you might be cramped up with too much explanation, too few, and your theory becomes very saturated. So to construct a theoretical framework, there is little to no need for you to create a schematic diagram. Actually, you don't construct a schematic diagram. The ones with charts, shapes, and arrows. You don't do that because there are no independent and dependent variables which are explicitly stated in qualitative research. Okay? You don't identify specific variables. Instead, the theoretical framework will contain the following. Number one, the introduction of the theories. You're going to introduce what theories you used. Number two, the name of that theory along with the definition or the nature. You're going to explain what the theory is all about. Okay, so include the theory's author and the date of publishing as well. Lastly, you're going to connect the theory to your study. In what way is this theory connected to my research? So you're going to explain that. You're going to explain the connection. So to give you a sample, okay, so this is just one of the theories used by the researchers. I'm not going to include all of them because it follows the same format. So the one in red is the introduction to the theories. As you can see, there is a paragraph dedicated for that one. Although the shared experiences and descriptive concerns of the participants regarding the student-centered approach will make up most of the information that will be analyzed and interpreted in the study, the researchers also acknowledged prior understandings, again, origins, regarding the central phenomenon of the research focus. This study makes use of a few theoretical concepts that will give further justifications of the data gathered or for the data gathered. These theories in particular include, and then what are the theories? In this case, they used three: the constructivist theory of Lev Vygotsky, the pragmatism theory of John Dewey, and the experiential theory of David Kolb. So for the purpose of this sample, I just included the constructivist theory because it's the same thing. Okay. The one in red is the name of the theory. The one in blue is the definition and the nature of the theory. Okay. So the researchers explained what the theory was all about. And mind you, they cited their sources, okay, or their source. Very, very important. This was written by MacLeod in 2019. So the researchers cited the work of MacLeod and paraphrased the whole thing. This is not the actual statement. Instead, this is a paraphrased version of the statement given by MacLeod. So where is the connection of the theory to the study? Here it is. Okay, so this is part 2. This is where the researchers attempted to begin creating the link between the research and the theory. This is actually diving into the explanation of the theory. So this one is just the nature, okay, the definition and the nature. But this one is the working of the theory. Okay, how does it work? How is it functional, or how does it function in real time? The connection is built and cemented in a way here. So this theory is significant for presenting substantial points that can deepen the understanding of the underlying motivation upholding the application of student-centered teaching inside the classroom. So it will help give a deeper grasp on the true impact of student-centered approach used in the classroom in terms of students' skill development. It is through this theory that the whole concept of the student-centered environment is clarified. So this is the connection of the theory to the study. So that being said, I believe we have completed the preliminary parts of the research. We are done with the background of the study, the purpose, the research questions, as well as the theoretical framework. And with that, just a few reminders. If you want to take a look at the samples, you can just rewind the whole thing and probably pause the video if you want to read through the paragraphs further. Okay, so I believe that would be all for this video. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Sir Dardar. Till next video, class dismissed.